Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's Stories. We now return to Snuff by Terry Pratchett, Part 5. The mother of Sam Vimes had managed, heaven knows how, to scrape up the penny a day necessary for him to be educated at the dame school run by Mistress Slightly. Mistress Slightly was everything a dame should be. She was fat and gave the impression of being made of marshmallows, had a gentle understanding of the fact that the bladders of small boys are almost as treacherous as the bladders of old men, and, in general, taught the basics of the alphabet with a minimum of cruelty and a maximum of marshmallow. She kept geese, as any self-respecting dame should do. Later in life, the older Vimes had wondered if, underneath the endless layers of petticoats, Mistress Slightly wore red and white spotted drawers. She certainly had a mob cap and a laugh like rainwater going down a drain. Invariably, while she gave lessons, she was peeling potatoes or plucking geese. There was still a place in his heart. There was still a place in his heart for old Mistress Slightly, who occasionally had a mint in her pocket for a boy who knew his alphabet and could say it backward. And you had to be grateful to someone who taught you how not to be afraid. She had one book in her tiny sitting room, and the first time she had given it to young Sam Vimes to read, he had got as far as page 7 when he froze. The page showed a goblin. The jolly goblin according to the text. Was it laughing? Was it scowling? Was it hungry? Was it about to bite your head off? Young Sam Vimes hadn't waited to find out, and had spent the rest of the morning under a chair. These days, he excused himself by remembering that most of the other kids felt the same way. When it came to the innocence of childhood, adults often got it wrong. In any case, she had sat him on her always slightly damp knee after class and made him really look at the goblin. It was made of lots of dots, tiny dots, if you look closely. The closer you looked at the goblin, the more it wasn't there. Stare it down, and it lost all its power to frighten. I hear that they are wretched, badly made mortals, the dame had said sadly. Half-finished folk, or so I hear. It's only a blessing this one had something to be jolly about. Later on, because he had been a good boy, she had made him blackboard monitor. The first time anyone had entrusted him with anything. Good old Mistress Slightly, Vimes thought, as he stood in this gloomy cave surrounded by ranks of silent, solemn goblins. I'll have a bag of peppermints on your grave if I get out of this alive. He cleared his throat. Well now, lad, what we appear to have here is a goblin who has been in a fight. He looked down at the corpse and then to Feeney. Perhaps you would care to tell me what you see? Feeney was one step away from trembling. Well, sir, I surmise that it is dead, sir. And how do you deduce this, please? Its head isn't attached to its body, sir? Yes, we generally recognise that as a clue that the corpse is indeed dead. Incidentally, lad, you may as well take the string off. I wouldn't say this is the best light I've ever seen by, but it'll do. Do you notice anything else, Chief Constable? Vimes tried to keep his tone level. Well, sir, it's pretty cut about, sir. Vimes smiled encouragingly. Notice anything about that, lad? Feeney was making heavy weather of it, but recruits often did at the start, doing so much looking that they forgot to see. You're doing well, Chief Constable. Would you care to extrapolate? Sir? Extrapolate, sir? Why would somebody be all cut about on their arms? Think about that. Feeney's lips actually moved as he thought, and then he grinned. He was defending himself with his hands, sir? Well done, lad. And people who are defending themselves with their hands are doing so because they don't have a shield or a weapon. I would wager, too, that his head was cut off while he was on the ground. Can't exactly put my finger on it, but that looks to me like deliberate butchering rather than a hasty slice. Everything is messy, but you can see that the belly has been sliced open, yet there is hardly any blood around it. He was taken by surprise, and because of the belly, would I know something else about him that I wish I didn't know, he said. What's that, sir? He is a she, and she was ambushed, or maybe trapped. And, he thought, there's a claw missing. After a while, it becomes a puzzle, not a corpse, said Vimes to himself, as he knelt down, but never soon enough, and never for long enough. Aloud, he said, look at the marks on this leg, lad. I reckon she stepped in a rabbit snare, probably because she was running away from somebody. Vimes stood up so fast that the watching goblins backed away. Good grief, boy, we shouldn't do that, not even in the country. Isn't there some kind of code? You kill the bucks, not the does, isn't that right? And this isn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. Someone wanted to get a lot of blood out of this lady. You tell me why. Vimes wasn't certain what Feeney would have replied had they not been surrounded by solemn-faced goblins, which was just as well. This is murder, lad. The capital crime. And do you know why it was done? I'll wager anything that it was so that Constable Upshot, acting on information received, would find a lot of blood in Dead Man's Corpse, where Commander Vimes was apparently going to have a meeting with an annoying blacksmith, and so, given that both of them were men of quick temper, quite possibly foul play could have been involved. Yes? It's a legitimate deduction, sir. You must admit that. Of course I do. And now it's a total bastard of a deduction. And now you must admit that. Yes, sir. I do, sir, and apologise. However, I'd like to search the premises for any sign of Mr. Jefferson. Feeney looked ashamed. Feeney looked half ashamed, half defiant. And why do you want to do that, Chief Constable? Feeney stuck out his chin. Because I've been shown to be a bloody fool once, and I don't intend to be one again. Besides, sir, you might be wrong. This poor lady might have been in a fight with the blacksmith, perhaps. I don't know. But I do know that if I don't make a search here in the circumstances, somebody important is bound to ask me why I didn't. And that person would be you, wouldn't it, Commander? Good answer, young man. And I have to admit that I've been a bloody fool more times than I can count, so I can sympathise. Vimes looked down again at the corpse. and it was suddenly urgent to try to find out what Willikins had done with the claw, complete with ring, that they had found the previous night. Awkwardly, he said to the assembled goblins, "I believe that I have found some jewellery belonging to this young lady, and, of course, I shall bring it to you." There was not so much as an acknowledgement from the impassive horde. Vimes considered that thought. Hordes come in killing and stealing. This lot looked like a bunch of worried people. He walked over to a grizzled old goblin who might have been the one he had seen up on the surface 1,000 years ago, and said, "I'd like to see more of this place, sir. I'm sorry for the death of the lady. I'll bring the killers to justice." "Just ice! Just ice! Just ice! Just ice!" Once again it echoed around the cave. The old goblin stepped forward very gently and touched Vimes' sleeve. "The dark is your friend, Mr. Policeman. I hear you. You hear me? In the dark you may go where you wish, Mr. Policeman. Please do not kill us." Vimes looked past the goblin to the ranks behind, most of them as skinny as rakes, and this, well, chieftain probably, who looked as though he was decomposing while standing up. Didn't want him to hurt them? He remembered the scattered flowers, the orphaned bergamot tea, the uneaten meal. They were trying to hide away from me. He nodded and said, "I do not attack anyone who isn't attacking me, sir, and I will not start today. Can you tell me how this lady came to be killed?" "She was thrown into our cave last night, Mr. Policeman. She had gone out to check the rabbit snares. Thrown down like old bones, Mr. Policeman, like old bones. No blood in her, like old bones." "What was her name?" The old goblin looked at Vimes as if shocked, and after a moment said, "Her name was the pleasant contrast of the orange and yellow petals in the flower of the gorse. Thank you, Mr. Policeman of the dark." "I'm afraid I'm only just starting to investigate this crime," said Vimes, feeling unusually embarrassed. "I meant Mr. Policeman. Thank you for believing that goblins have names. My name is Sound of the Rain on Hard Ground. She was my second wife." Vimes stared at the rugged face that only a mother could tolerate and perhaps love, searching for any sign of anger or grief. There was just a sense of sorrow and hopeless resignation at the fact that the world was as it was and always would be, and there was nothing that could be done. The goblin was aside on legs. In dejection, he looked up at Vimes and said, "They used to send hungry dogs into cave, Mr. Policeman. Those were good days. We ate well." "This is my land," said Vimes, "and I think I can see to it that you're not disturbed here." Something like a chuckle found its way through the old goblin's ragged beard. "We know what the law is, Mr. Policeman. The law is the land." You say, this is my land, but you did not make the land. You did not make your sheep. You did not make the rabbits on which we live. You did not make the cows or the horses, but you say, these things are mine. This cannot be a truth. I make my axe, my pots, and these are mine. What I wear is mine. Some love was mine. Now it has gone. I think you are a good man, Mr. Policeman. But we see the turning of the times. Maybe 100 or 200 years ago, there was in the world what people called the wilderness, or no man's land, or wasteland, and we lived in such places. We are waste people. There was the troll race, the dwarf race, the human race, and I am sorry for the goblin race that we cannot run so fast. Somebody pulled at Vimes' shirt. This time it was Feeney. You'd best be going now, sir. Vimes turned. Why? Sorry, sir, but her ladyship did instruct you to be back for tea. We're conducting a murder investigation, Chief Constable. I don't mean to be rude, but I'm sure Mr. Rain on hard ground here will understand. We must see for ourselves that the missing blacksmith is not here. Feeney fidgeted. I couldn't help noticing that her ladyship was very expressive on the subject, sir. Vimes nodded to the old goblin. I'll find out who killed your wife, sir, and I'll bring them to justice. He paused on cue as another chorus of Just ice! Just ice! Just ice! Just ice! echoed around the caves. But first I must, for police reasons, inspect the rest of this establishment, if you have no objection. The goblin looked at him bright-eyed. And if I object, Mr. Policeman? Vimes matched his stare. An interesting question, he said. And if you threaten us with violence, I would leave. Indeed, if you forbade me to search, then I would leave. And, sir, the worst part is that I would not come back. Sir, I respectfully ask that I may, in the pursuit of my inquiries, be shown around the rest of these premises. Was that a smile on the old goblin's face? Of course, Mr. Policeman. Behind the old goblin, the rest of the crowd began to move away, presumably to either make pots or fill them. Rain on hard ground, who, it had to be assumed because nothing had been said to the contrary, was either a chieftain, as Vimes would understand it, or simply a goblin tasked with talking to stupid humans, said, You are seeking the blacksmith? He visits us sometimes. There is iron down here. Not much, but he finds it useful. Of course, it is no good for pots, but we trade it for food. I don't think I have seen him for several days. However, by all means, look for him without hindrance. The dark is in you. I would not dare to stand in your way, Mr. Policeman. Such as it is, this place is yours. With that, The old goblin beckoned to some juvenile goblins to pick up all that was left of his wife and drifted away toward another cave mouth. "Have you seen a lot of dead bodies, Commander?" said Feeny, in a voice that almost managed not to shake. "Oh yes, lad, and some of them I helped to make." "You've killed people?" Vimes looked at the ceiling so as not to have to look at Feeny's face. "I like to think I did my best not to," he said. "And on the whole, I've been good at that. But sooner or later, there's always going to be somebody who is determined to finish you off, and you end up having to take him down the wrong way because he's just too damn stupid to surrender. It doesn't get any better, and I've never seen a corpse that looked good." The funeral group had disappeared into the other cave now, and the two policemen were left alone, but feeling, however, that around them people were going about their business. The old goblin had just stood there and mentioned that the woman was his wife, almost as an afterthought. He hadn't even raised his voice. Vimes couldn't have stood there like that if it had been Sybil's body on the ground in front of him, and as sure as hell he would not be polite to any goblins who were in front of him either. How can you get like that? How can life so beat you down? The street was always with you, just as Willikins had said, and Vimes remembered the ladies who scrubbed. Cockbill Street got scrubbed so often that it was surprising it wasn't now at a lower level than the ground around it. The doorstep was scrubbed, then whitened, and then whitened. The red tiles on the floor inside were scrubbed and then polished with red lead. And the black cooking stove was blackened even further by being rubbed ferociously with black lead. Women in those days had elbows that moved like pistons, and it was all about survival. And survival was all about pride. You didn't have much control over your life, but by Jimmy, you could keep it clean and show the world you were poor but respectable. That was the dread. The dread of falling back, losing standards, becoming no better than those people who bred and fought and stole in that ferocious turmoil of a rockery known as the Shades. The goblins had succumbed, had they? Going through the motions now, while the world gently expelled them. They were giving up, letting go. But murder was murder in any jurisdiction or none at all. He tied his thoughts in a knot under his chin, snatched a couple of smouldering torches and said, "Come on, Chief Constable, let's go and fight crime." "Yes, sir," said Feeny, "but can I ask you another question?" "Of course," said Vimes, heading toward a tunnel that was perceptibly sloping downward. "What's going on here, sir, if you don't mind me asking? I mean, I know that there's been a murder, and maybe some bugger wanted me to think it was you as done it, but how come, sir, that you understand that heathen lingo of theirs? I mean, I hear you talking to them, and they must understand you, 'cause they talk back, sir, but they talk like somebody cracking walnuts under their foot, sir, and I can't understand a damn word of it, sir. And if you'll excuse my clutching, not a damn word. I want an answer, sir, because I feel enough of a bloody fool as it is. I don't want to be even more foolish than I feel now." Vimes, in the privacy of his own head, tried out the statement. "Well, since you asked, I have a deadly demon sharing my mind, which seems to be helping me for reasons of its own. It lets me see in this gloom and somehow allows me and goblins to communicate. It's called the Summoning Dark. I don't know what its interest in goblins is, but the dwarf think it brings down wrath on the unrighteous. If there has been a murder, I'll use any help I can get. He did not, in fact, articulate this on the basis that most people would have left very quickly by the time he had finished, so he settled for saying, I have the support of a higher power, Chief Constable. Now let's check out this place. This didn't satisfy Feeney, but he appeared to understand that this was all he was going to get. It was an eerie journey. The hill was honeycombed with passages natural and, occasionally, by the look of it, artificial. It was a small city. There were middens, crude cages now empty of whatever had been in them, and here and there quite large beds of fungus, in some cases being harvested very, very slowly by goblins who barely glanced at the policeman. At one point, they passed an opening which appeared to lead to a creche. Creche. C-R-E'-C-H-E, creche. A foundling hospital, a day nursery. Creche, a group of young animals such as penguins or bats, gathered in one place for care and protection, usually by one or more adults. Creche. At one point they passed an opening which appeared to lead to a creche, by the sound of it, in which case baby goblins twittered like birds. Vimes couldn't bring himself to look further inside. As they went lower down, they came across a very small rivulet that trickled out of one wall. The goblins, in a rough and ready way, had made a culvert. Culvert, a transverse drain. Culvert. The goblins, in a rough and ready way, had made a culvert, so that their journey onward was to the sound of running water. And everywhere there were goblins, and the goblins were making pots. Vimes was prepared for this, but badly prepared. He had expected something like the dwarf workshops he had seen in Uberwald, noisy, busy and full of purposeful activity. But that wasn't the goblin way. It appeared that if a goblin wanted to start on a pot, all it needed to do was find a place to hunker down, rummage through whatever it was it had in its pockets, and get to work, so slowly that it was hard to tell that anything was going on. Several times Vimes thought he heard the chip of stone on stone, or the sound of scratching, or what might be sawing. But whenever he came close to a squatting goblin, it politely edged around and leaned over the work like a child trying to keep a secret. How much snot, he thought. How many fingernail clippings? How much earwax did a goblin accumulate in 1 year? Would an annual pot of snot be something like a lady's delicate snuff box, or would it be a sloshing great bucketful? And why not, yes, why not teeth? Even humans were careful when it came to the escaped teeth, and come to that, there were people, especially wizards, who made a point of ensuring that their toenails were put beyond use. He smiled to himself. Maybe the goblins weren't all that stupid, only more stupid than humans were, which, when you came to think about it, took some effort. And then, as they crept past a cross-legged goblin, it sat back on its haunches and held up light. Vimes had seen plenty of jewels, generations of rings, brooches, necklaces, and tiaras had funneled down the centuries and into Lady Sybil's lap, although these days most of them were kept in a vault. That always amused him. Sparkle though Sybil's jewels might, he would have sworn that none of them could have filled the air with light as much as the little pot did when its creator held it up for a critical appraisal. The goblin turned it this way and that, inspecting it like a man thinking of buying a horse from somebody called Honest Harry. White and yellow beams of light shimmered as it moved, filling the drab cave with what Vimes could only think of as echoes of light. Feeny was staring as a child might stare at his first party. The goblin, however, appeared to sneer at its creation and tossed it dismissively behind him, where it smashed on the wall. "Why did you do that?" Vimes shouted, so loudly that the goblin he was addressing cowered and looked as if it expected to be struck. It managed to say, "Bad pot! Bad work! For to be ashamed! Make much better one time more! We'll start now!" It took another terrified look at Vimes and hurried into the darkness of the cave. "He smashed it! He actually smashed it!" Feeny stared at Vimes. "He took one look at it and smashed it! And it was wonderful! That was criminal! You can't just destroy something as wonderful as that, can you?" Vimes put a hand on Feeny's shoulder. "I think you can, if you've just made it, and think you could have done it better. After all, even the best craftsmen sometimes make mistakes, yes?" "You think that was a mistake?" Feeny rushed over to where the debris of the late pot had hit the floor and picked up a handful of glittering remains. "Sir, he did throw these away, sir." Vimes opened his mouth to reply, but there was a faint noise from Feeny's hand. Dust was falling between his fingers like the sands of time. Feeny grinned nervously at Vimes and said, "Maybe it was a bit shoddy after all, sir." Vimes squatted down and ran his fingers through the pile of dust. And it was just dust, stone dust, no more colour or sparkle to it than you would find in a pebble by the road. There was no trace of the scintillating rainbow that they had just seen. Scintillating. S-C-I-N-T-I-L-L-A-T-I-N-G. Scintillating. Brilliantly lively, stimulating or witty. Scintillating. There was no trace of the scintillating rainbow that they had just seen. But on the other side of this cave, another goblin was trying to look inconspicuous as it worked on what was probably another pot. Vimes stepped over to it with care because it was holding its pot as if prepared to use it to defend itself. Casually, to show that he meant no harm, Vimes put his hands behind his back and said, in tones learned from his wife, "My word, that looks like a very good pot. Tell me, how do you make a pot, sir? Can you tell me?" The potter looked down at the thing in its hands, or the thing in its claws if you wanted to be nasty and perhaps slightly more accurate, and said, "I make the pot!" It raised the work in progress. Vimes wasn't that good at stone which wasn't part of masonry, but this one was slightly yellow and shiny. He said, "Yes, I can see that. But how do you actually make the pot?" Once again, the potter sought enlightenment from the universe, looking up and down and everywhere that Vimes wasn't. At last, inspiration dawned. "I make pot!" Vimes nodded gravely. "Thank you for sharing the secrets of your success," he said and turned to Feeney. "Come on, let's keep going." It seemed that a goblin cave or lair or burrow, depending on what effect you wanted to give, was not quite the hellhole that you might have thought. Instead, it was just, well, a hole, stuffy with the smoke of the innumerable small fires goblins appeared to need, along with the associated small pile of rotted kindling, and not forgetting the personal midden. Midden, a dunghill, a refuse heap. A small pile as of seeds, bones, or leaves gathered by a rodent, such as a pack rat. Midden. And not forgetting the personal midden. Goblins, old and young, watched them carefully as they passed, as if expecting them to put on a program of entertainment. They were certainly juvenile goblins. Vimes had to admit that alone among the talking species, goblin babies were plug ugly. Merely small versions of their parents who themselves were no oil paintings, and not even a watercolor. Vimes told himself that they could not help it, that some incompetent god had found a lot of bits left over and decided that the world needed a creature that looked like a cross between a wolf and an ape, and gave them what was surely one of the most unhelpful pieces of religious dogma, even by the standards of celestial idiocy. They looked like the bad guys, and without the intervention of the summoning dark, they sounded like them too. If walnuts could shriek when they were being cracked, then people would say, "Doesn't that remind you of a goblin?" And it appeared that, not content with all this, the laughing god had apparently given them that worst of gifts, self-knowledge, leaving them so certain that they were irrevocably walking rubbish that, metaphorically, they couldn't even find the energy to clean the step. "Oh, blast! I'm treading on something. In something," said Feeney. "You seem to be able to see much better than me down here, sir." "Good, clean living, lad. Carrots and whatnot." "Jefferson could be in here somewhere. I'm sure there are caves that we're missing." "I know he's not in here, lad. Only don't ask me how I know, because I would have to lie to you. I'm going through the motions to help myself think. It's an old copper trick." "Yes, sir. Treading in every motion, I should think." Vimes smiled in the gloom. "Well done, lad. A sense of humour is the copper's friend. I always say the day isn't complete without a little chuckle." He paused because something had clanged against his helmet. "We've reached Jefferson's iron workings, my lad. I just found an oil lamp. I certainly haven't seen those higher up." He felt in his pocket, and soon a match flame bloomed. Well, Vimes thought, it's not that much of a mine, but I bet it works out better than paying dwarf prices. "I can't see any way out," Feeney volunteered. "I suppose he drags the ore out through the main entrance." "I don't think that the goblins are stupid enough to live in a set of caves that have just one entrance. There's probably one that doesn't even show up on the outside. Look, You can see where somebody's been lugging heavy weights across the stone. Vimes stopped. There was another human in the cave. Well, thank you, darkness, he thought. I suppose asking who it is might be in order. Sir, I don't think it's just mining that goes on here. Take a look at these, said Feeney behind Vimes. Feeney held out some books, children's books by the look of it. They were grubby. This was, after all, the home of goblins. But Vimes turned to the first page of the book and was not surprised to see an unfeasibly large red apple, currently somewhat soiled by the pressure of many dirty hands. A voice in the gloom, a female voice, said, "Not all questions are answered, Commander, but fortunately, some answers are questioned. I'm attempting to teach the goblin children. Of course, I had to bring in an apple for the young ones to see." The woman in the shadows added, "Not many knew what one was, and certainly not what they were called. Troll language is unbelievably complex compared with what these poor devils have got. Good day to you too, Mr. Upshot. Not cowering away from the truth in your lockup?" Vimes had spun round when he first heard that voice, and was now staring with his mouth open. "You! Aren't you the Pooh lady?" "Yes, Commander Vimes. It's amazing, isn't it, how people remember?" "Well, you must admit that it does, how can I put it, stick in the mind, Miss Felicity Beadle." "Very well done, Commander, considering that we've met only once." And now Vimes noticed that with her there was a goblin, a young one by the size of it, but more noticeably because it was staring directly at him with a keen and interested gaze, quite uncharacteristic of the goblins that he had seen so far, apart from the wretched Stinky. Feeney, on the other hand, was taking great care not to catch the lady's eye, Vimes noticed. Vimes smiled at Miss Beadle. "Madam, I reckon I see your name at least once every day. When I was putting my lad to bed yesterday, do you know what he said? He said, 'Dad, do you know why cows do big, wet, sloppy poos, and horses do them all nice and soft and smelling of grass? Because it's weird, isn't it, that you get two different kinds of poo when they're both about the same size, and it's the same grass, isn't it, Dad?' Well, the poo lady says it's because cows have room in ants, and the ants help them get, sort of, more food out of their food. But because horses don't have room in ants, they don't sort of chew all that much, so that their poo is still very much like grass and doesn't smell too bad." Vimes saw that the woman was grinning and went on. "I believe that tomorrow he is going to ask his mother if he may chew his dinner very hard one day, and the next day not do it very much, and see if he gets different smells. What do you think of that, madam?" Miss Beadle laughed. It was a very enjoyable laugh. "Well, Commander, it would seem that your son combines your analytical thinking with the inherited rampkin talent for experimentation. You must be very proud. I certainly hope you are." "You can bet on that, madam." The child standing in Miss Beadle's shadow was smiling too, the first smile he'd seen on a goblin. But before he could say anything, Miss Beadle directed a disapproving look at Feeney and went on. "I only wish I could find you in better company, Commander. I wonder if you know where my friend Jethro is, officer?" Even in the lamplight, Feeney looked furious. But if you read people, and Vimes was a ferocious reader, it was clear the fury was spiced with shame and dread. Then Vimes looked down at the little bench, where there were a few tools and some more brightly covered books. It was the streets that had taught Vimes that there were times when you would find it best to let a nervous person get really nervous, and so he picked up a book as if the previous dreadful exchange had not taken place, and said, "Oh, here's Where's My Cow? Young Sam loves it. Are you teaching it to the goblins, miss?" With her eyes still on the agitated Feeney, Miss Beadle said, "Yes, for what it's worth. It's hard work, incidentally. Technically, I'm Mrs. Beadle. My husband was killed in the Clatchin War. I went back to Ms. because, well, it's more authory, and besides, it wasn't as though I'd had much time to get accustomed to Mrs." "I'm sorry about that, madam. Had I known, I'd have been a lot less flippant," said Vimes. Flippant. Lacking proper respect or seriousness. Flippant. Glib. Talkative. "I'm sorry about that, madam. Had I known, I'd have been a lot less flippant," said Vimes. Miss Beadle gave him a wan smile. "Don't worry. Flippant sometimes does the trick." Beside the teacher, the little goblin said, "Flippant? The ant is turned over?" "Tears of the Mushroom is my star pupil. You're wonderful, aren't you, Tears of the Mushroom?" "Wonderful is good," said the goblin girl, as though tasting every word. "Gentle is good. The mushroom is good. Tears are soft. I am Tears of the Mushroom. This much is now said." It was a strange little speech. The girl spoke as if she were pulling words out of a rack and then tidily putting them back in their places as soon as they had been said. It sounded very solemn, and it came from an odd, flat, pale face. In a way, Tears of the Mushroom looked handsome, if not exactly pretty, in what looked like a wrap-around apron, and Vimes wondered how old she was. 13, 14, maybe? And he wondered if they would all look as smart as this if they got their hands on some decent clothing and did something about their god-awful hair. The girl's hair was long and braided and pure white. Amazingly, in this place she looked like a piece of fragile porcelain. Not knowing what to say, he said it anyway. "Pleased to meet you, Tears of the Mushroom." Vimes held out his hand. The goblin girl looked at it, then looked at him, and then turned to Miss Beadle, who said, "They don't shake hands, Commander. For people who seem so simple, they're astoundingly complicated." She turned to Vimes. "It would seem, Commander, that Providence has brought you here in time to solve the murder of the goblin girl, who was an excellent pupil. I came up here as soon as I heard, but the goblins are used to undeserved and casual death. I'll walk with you to the entrance, and then I've got a class to teach." Vimes tugged at Feeney to make him keep up as they followed Miss Beadle and her charge toward the surface and blessed fresh air. He wondered what had become of the corpse. What did they do with their dead? Bury them? Eat them? Throw them on the midden? Or was he just not thinking right? A thought which itself had been knocking at his brain for some time. Without thinking, he said, "What else do you teach them, Miss Beadle? To be better citizens?" The slap caught him on the chin, probably because even in her anger Miss Beadle realized that he still had his steel helmet on. It was a corker, nonetheless, and out of the corner of his stinging gaze he saw Feeny take a step back. At least the boy had some sense. "You are the gods' own fool, Commander Vimes. No, I'm not teaching them to be fake humans. I'm teaching them how to be goblins. Clever goblins. Do you know that they have only 5 names for colours? Even trolls have around 60. And a lot more than that if they find a paint salesman. Does this mean goblins are stupid? No. They have a vast number of names for things that even poets haven't come up with. For things like the way colours shift and change. The melting of one hue into another. They have single words for the most complicated of feelings. I know about 200 of them, I think. And I'm sure there are a lot more. What you may think are grunts and growls and snarls are in fact carrying vast amounts of information. They're like an iceberg, Commander. Most of them is where you can't see or understand. And I'm teaching Tears of the Mushroom and some of her friends so that they may be able to speak to people like you who think they are dumb. And do you know what, Commander? There isn't much time. They're being slaughtered. It's not called that, of course, but slaughter is how it ends. Because they're just dumb nuisances, you see? Why don't you ask Mr. Upshot what happened to the rest of the goblins 3 years ago, Commander Vimes? And with that, Miss Beadle turned on her heel and disappeared down into the darkness of the cave with Tears of the Mushroom bobbing along behind her, leaving Vimes to walk the last few yards out into the glorious sunlight. The feeling that hit Samuel Vimes when he stepped into the vivid light of day was as if somebody had pushed an iron wire through his body and then, in one moment, pulled it out again. It was all he could do to keep his balance, and the boy grabbed him by the arm. Full marks, Vimes thought, for being either smart enough to see how the land lay, or at least smart enough not to make a run for it just now. He sat down on the turf, relishing the breeze through the gorse bushes and sucking in pure, fresh air. Whatever you thought about goblins, their cave had the kind of atmosphere about which people say, "I should wait 2 minutes before going in there if I was you." "I'd like to talk with you, Chief Constable," he said now, "copper to copper, about the past and maybe about the shape of things to come." "Actually, I meant to thank you, Commander, for thinking that I'm a policeman." "Your father was policeman down here 3 years ago, yes?" Feeny stared straight ahead. "Yes, sir." "So, what happened with the goblins, Feeny?" Feeny cleared his throat. "Well, Dad told me and Mum to stay indoors. He said we was not to look. But he couldn't tell us not to listen, and there was a lot of shouting, and I don't know what, and it upset my old Mum no end. I heard later that a load of goblins had been taken out of the hill, but Dad never spoke about it until much later. I think it broke him, sir. It really did. He said he watched while a bunch of men, gamekeepers and roughs mostly, came down from the cave dragging goblins behind them, sir. Lots of them. He said what was so dreadful was that the goblins were all sort of meek, you know, like they didn't know what to do. Vimes relented a little at the sight of Feeney's face. Go on, lad. Well, sir, he told me people came out of their houses and there was a lot of running about, and he started to ask questions and, well, the magistrate said it was all right because they were nothing more than vermin, and they were going to be taken down to the docks where they could earn their living for a change and not bother other people. It was all right, Dad said. They were going somewhere sunny, a long way away from here. Just out of interest, Mr. Feeney, how could he know that? Dad said the magistrates were very firm about it, sir. They were just to be put to work for their living. He said that it was doing them a favour. It wasn't as if they were going to be killed. Vimes kept his expression deliberately blank. He sighed. If it was without their consent, then that would be slavery. And if a slave doesn't work for his living, he's dead. Do you understand? Feeney looked at his boots. If eyeballs had polish on them, his boots would have been gleaming. After he told me this, my dad told me that I was a copper now, and I was to look after Mum, and he gave me the truncheon and his badge. And then his hand started shaking, sir, and a few days later, he was dead, sir. I reckon something snuck up on him, sir, in his head like. It overcame him. Have you heard about Lord Veterinary, Feeney? I can't say I like him all that much, but sometimes he's bang on the money. Well, there was a bit of a fracas, as we say, and it turned out that a man had a dog, a half-dead thing, according to bystanders, and he was trying to get it to stop pulling at his leash, and when it growled at him, he grabbed an axe from the butcher's stall beside him, threw the dog to the ground, and cut off its back legs, just like that. I suppose people would say, nasty bugger, but it was his dog, and so on. But Lord Veterinary called me in and he said to me, a man who would do something like that to a dog is a man to whom the law should pay close attention. Search his house immediately. The man was hanged a week later. Not for the dog, although for my part, I wouldn't have shed a tear if he had been, but for what we found in his cellar, the contents of which I will not burden you with. And bloody Veterinary got away with it again because he was right. Where there are little crimes, large crimes are not far behind. Vimes stared at the rolling acres stretching out below. His fields, his trees, his fields of yellow corn, all his, even though he'd never planted a seed in his life, except for the time when he was a kid and he tried to grow mustard and cress on a flannel, which he'd then thrown up because no one had told him he should have washed the flannel first to get all the soap out. Not a good background for a landowner. But his land, right? And he was sure that neither he nor Sybil had ever said yes to turning a lot of sad-looking goblins out of the mess they were pleased to call a home and taking them to who knew where. Nobody told us! Feeney leaned back to escape that particular bowl of wrath. I wouldn't know about that, sir. Vimes stood up and stretched his arms. I've heard enough, lad, and I've had enough too. It's time to report to a higher authority. I think it'd take at least a day and a half to get a galloper to the city, sir, and you'd have to be lucky with horses. Sam Vimes began to walk smartly down the hill. I was talking about Lady Sybil, lad. Sybil was in a drawing room full of teacups and ladies when Vimes arrived at the hall in a run, with Feeney lagging behind. She took one look at him and said rather more brightly than warranted, "Oh, I see you have something to discuss with me." She turned to the ladies, smiled and said, "Please do excuse me, ladies. I must just have a brief word with my husband." And with that, she grabbed Vimes and pulled him none too gently back into the hallway. She opened her mouth to deliver a wifely sermon on the importance of punctuality, sniffed, and recoiled. "Sam Vimes, you stink! Did you fall into something rural? I've hardly seen you since breakfast. And why are you still dragging that young policeman behind you? I'm sure he's got something more important to do. Didn't he want to arrest you? Is he coming to tea? I hope he washes first." This was said to Vimes, but aimed at Feeney, who was keeping his distance and looked ready to run. "That was a misunderstanding," said Vimes hastily. "And I'm sure that if I ever find out where my escutcheon is, there won't be a stain on it. But Mr. Feeney here has been generously and of his own free will imparting information to me." Escutcheon, 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 a defined area on which armorial bearings are displayed and which usually consists of a shield. Escutcheon, a protective or ornamental plate or flang, as around a keyhole. Escutcheon. "I'm sure that if I ever find out where my escutcheon is, there won't be a stain on it. But Mr. Feeney here has been generously and of his own free will imparting information to me." And by the time the husband and wife conversation was in full swing, containing shouted whispers on the lines of "Surely not," and "I think he's telling the truth," Feeney looked ready to sprint. "And they didn't put up a fight," said Sybil. The young policeman tried to avoid her gaze, but she had the kind of gaze that came around to find you wherever you stood. "No, your ladyship," was all he managed. Lady Sybil looked at her husband and shrugged. "There would be one hell of a fight with someone who wanted to take me off to a place I didn't want to go to," she said. "And I thought goblins had weapons." "Pretty nasty fighters, so I've heard. I'd have thought there'd have been a war. We would have heard about it. From the way you talk about it, it sounds as if they were sleepwalking. Or perhaps they were starving. I haven't noticed very many rabbits around here, compared with when I was a little girl. And why leave some behind? It's all a bit of a puzzle, Sam. Nearly everyone around here is a family friend." She held up a hand quickly. "I wouldn't dream of asking you to fail in your duty, Sam. You must understand that. But be careful and be sure of every step. And please, Sam, and I know you, Sam, don't go at it like a bull at a gate. People round here might get the wrong idea." Sam Vimes was certain that he did have the wrong idea, and his brow wrinkled as he said, "I don't know, Sybil. How does a bull go at a gate? Does it just stop and look puzzled?" "No, dear. It smashes everything to pieces." Lady Sybil gave a warning smile and brushed herself down. "I don't think we need detain you any longer, Mr. Upshot," she said to the grateful Feeney. "Do remember me to your dear mother, if she doesn't mind. I'd like to meet her while I'm down here again to talk about old times." In the meantime, I suggest you leave via the kitchen, no matter what my husband thinks about a policeman using the servants' entrance. And tell cook to supply you with, well, anything your mother would like. She turned to her husband. Why don't you escort him down there, Sam? And since you're enjoying the fresh air, why not go and find young Sam? I think he's back in the barnyard with Willikins. Feeney was silent as they went down the long corridors, but Vimes sensed the boy's mind working its way through a problem, which came out when he said, Lady Sybil is a very nice, kind lady, isn't she, sir? I do not need to be reminded of that, said Vimes, and I'd like you to understand that she stands in vivid contrast to me. I get edgy when I think there's a crime unsolved. A crime unsolved is against nature. I keep thinking of the goblin girl, sir. She looked like a statue, and the way she spoke, well, I don't know what to say. I mean, they can be a bloody nuisance. They'll have the laces out of your boots if you don't move quick enough, but when you see them in their cave, you realise there's, well, kids, old granddad goblins and old mum goblins, Vimes suggested quietly. Once again, Mrs. Upshot's little boy struggled in the unfamiliar and terrifying grip of philosophy and fetched up with, Well, sir, I dare say cows make good mothers, but at the end of the day, a calf is veal on the hoof, yes? Maybe, but what would you say if the calf walked up to you and said, Hello, my name is Tears of the Mushroom? Feeney's face once again frowned in the effort of novel cogitation. I think I'd have the salad, sir. Vimes smiled. You were in a difficult position, lad, and I'll tell you something. So am I. It's called being a copper. That's why I like it when they run. That makes it all so simple. They run and I chase. I don't know if it's metaphysical or something like that. But there was a corpse. You saw it. So did I. And so did Miss Beadle. Keep that in mind. Young Sam was sitting on a hay bale in the farmyard, watching the horses come in. He ran to his dad, looking very pleased with himself, and said, Dad, you know chickens? Vimes picked up his son and said, Yes, I have heard of them, Sam. Young Sam wriggled out of his father's grasp as if being picked up and swung around was inappropriate activity for a serious researcher in scatological studies, and looked solemn. Do you know, Dad, that when a chicken does a poo, there's a white bit on top which is the wee? Sometimes it's like the icing on a bun, Dad. Thank you for letting me know, said Vimes. I'll remember that next time I eat a bun. And every time after that, he added to himself. I suppose you know everything about poo now, Sam? Vimes said hopefully, and he saw Willikins smile. Young Sam, now staring at a pile of chicken droppings through a little magnifying glass, shook his head without looking up. Oh no, Dad, Mister. Here, young Sam stopped and looked at Willikins hopefully. Willikins cleared his throat and said, Mr. Trout, one of the gamekeepers, was around half an hour ago. And of course your lad will strike up a conversation with anybody, And the upshot is that young Sam, it would appear, sir, would like to amass a collection of the droppings of a number of woodland creatures. Gamekeepers, thought Vimes. He ran that across his brain and thought about who had actually rounded the goblins up 3 years ago. And then he thought, how important is that compared with the question, who told them to? I think I've got the smell of this place. People do what they're told because they've always done what they're told. But gamekeepers are a canny lot. It's not just human beings they have to outsmart. And remember, this is the countryside where everybody knows everybody else and notices everybody else. I don't think Feeney is lying, so other people know what happened here one night 3 years ago. I mustn't be a bull at a gate, said Sybil. And she's right. I need to know where I'm treading. What happened 3 years ago. I can afford to take my time over this one. Aloud, he said. How far can I take this? It seems you've had a busy day, sir, said Willikins. This morning you went down to the lock-up with a little tit who thinks he is a copper, and then, in company with a goblin, you and said little tit went up to Dead Man's Corpse, where you remained for quite some time, until you and the aforesaid little tit came out and you arrived here, minus one tit just now. Willikins grinned at Vimes. There's people coming and going down in the kitchens all the time, sir, and gossip is a kind of currency when you get beyond the green door. You've got to remember, sir, that despite Mr. Silver's dirty looks, I am the top knob below stairs, and I can go where I like and do what I like, and they can choke on it if they like. The whole of the hill is visible from some window or other in this house, and maids are very cooperative, sir. It seems that all the girls are busting for a job in the Scoon Avenue establishment. Very keen they are for the city lights, sir, very cooperative. Also, I found quite a good telescope in the study. Remarkable view of Hangman's Hill, you know. I could practically read your lips. Young Sam quite enjoyed the game of searching for Dad. Vimes felt a pang of guilt at those words. This was supposed to be a family holiday, wasn't it? But someone killed a goblin girl up at Dead Man's Corpse, he said, his voice dull. They made sure there was a lot of blood to give our keen young copper something that he could think of as a case. He's floundering. I don't think he's ever seen a corpse before. Willikins looked genuinely taken aback. What? Never? Maybe I'll retire down here, except I'll die of boredom. A thought struck Vimes and he said, When you were looking through the telescope, did you see anyone else go up the hill? Willikins shook his head. No, sir, just you. They both turned to watch young Sam, who was carefully drawing chicken poo in his notebook, and Willikins said quietly, You've got a good lad there, very bright. Make the most of the time, sir. Vimes shook his head. Gods, no, you're right. But, well, she was cut about, and with steel, definitely steel. They only have stone weapons. They cut her about to make certain there was enough blood that even a stupid flatfoot would spot it. And she was named after the colours of a flower. There was a disapproving noise from Willikins. Coppers shouldn't get sentimental. It's bad for the judgment. You said it yourself. You find yourself in some bloody awful domestic scene, and you think things could be improved by kicking the shit out of somebody. Only, how do you know when to stop? That's what you said. You said whacking a bloke in the fight is one thing, but when he's been cuffed, it ain't right. To Vimes's surprise, Willikins tapped him on the shoulder in a kindly way. You'd know it instantly if Willikins tapped you in an unfriendly way. Take my advice, Commander, and have tomorrow off too. There's a boating house on the lake, and later you could take the little lad out in the woods, which are, by all accounts, knee-deep in poo of all sorts. He'll be in poo heaven. Oh, and he also told me that he wants to go and see the smelly skull man again. I'll tell you what, I reckon with a mind like his, he'll be Arch-Chancellor of Unseen University by the time he's 60. Willikins must have seen the grimace on Vimes's face, because he went on. Why so surprised, sir? He might want to be an alchemist, right? Don't say you'd want him to be a copper. You wouldn't, would you? At least when you're a wizard, people don't try to kick you in the fork, right? Of course, you do have to go up against dreadful creatures from hellish dimensions, but they don't carry knives and you get training. Worth thinking about, Commander, because he's growing like a weed and you should be putting him on the right track through life. And now, if you'll excuse me, Commander, I'm off to annoy the servants. Willikins took a few steps, then stopped, looked at Vimes and said, Look at it like this, sir. If you take some time off, the guilty will be no less guilty, and the dead won't get any less dead, and her ladyship will not try to behead you with a coat hanger. The guests at Lady Sybil's tea party were leaving when Vimes got back to the hall. He scraped the countryside off his boots and headed to the hall's master bathroom. Of course, there were plenty of bathrooms around the place, probably more than there were in a street in most of the city, where a tin bath, a jug and basin, or nothing at all were the ablutions of choice or necessity. Ablution. Formal, the washing of one's body or part of it, as in a religious rite, usually plural. Ablution. Ablutions, plural, British, a building on a military base that houses bathing and toilet facilities. Ablutions. Where a tin bath, a jug and a basin, or nothing at all were the ablutions of choice or necessity. But this bathroom had been built to a design by Mad Jack Ramkin, and resembled the famous bathroom at Unseen University. Although, had Mad Jack designed that one, it would have been called the Obscene University, since Mad Jack had a healthy, or possibly unhealthy, liking for the ladies, and in his bathroom it showed. Oh dear, it showed. Of course, the white marble lovelies were dignified with urns, bunches of marble grapes, and even the ever-popular length of gauze, which had, happily, landed in just the right place to stop art becoming pornography. It was also, in all probability, the only bath that had taps marked hot, cold, brandy. And then there were the frescoes. Frescoes, the art of painting on freshly spread moist lime plaster with water-based pigments. Fresco. And then there were the frescoes, such that if you were a man easily persuaded, then it was a good job there was a cold tap, because not to put too fine a point on it, as it were, there were a large number of fine points all over them. Yes, indeed. And the ladies were only the start of the problem. There were marble gentlemen as well. Definitely gentlemen, even the ones with goat's feet. It was surprising that the water in the bath didn't boil of its own accord. He had asked Sybil about it, and she said that it was an important feature of the hall, and gentlemen collectors of antiquities would often visit in order to inspect it. Vimes had said that he expected that they did. Oh, yes, indeed. Sybil had said that there was no need for that tone of voice, because she had occasionally taken a bath there from the time she had been 12, and had seen no harm in it. It had, she said, stopped her from being surprised later on. And now Vimes lay in the luxurious tub, feeling as if he was trying to fit all the bits of his brain together. He was only vaguely aware of the bathroom door opening, and of hearing Sybil say, "I've put young Sam to bed, and he's sleeping soundly, although I can't imagine what he might be dreaming about." Then Vimes floated again in the warm, steamy atmosphere, and was only just aware of the swish of cloth hitting the floor. Lady Sybil slid in beside him. The water rose, and so, in accordance with the physics of this business, so did the spirits of Sam Vimes. A few hours later, almost drowning in the pillows on the huge bed and floating just above unconsciousness in a warm pink glow, Sam Vimes was certain that he heard his own voice whispering to him, and it said, "Think of the things that don't fit. Wonder why the nice lady of the nobby classes wanders down into a goblin cave as if it's a natural thing to do." He replied, "Well, Sybil spends half her time at home covered in heavy protective gear and a flame-proof helmet because she likes dragons. It's the sort of thing that nobby ladies tend to do." He considered what he had to say and responded to himself, "Yes, but dragons are what you might call socially acceptable. Goblins, on the other hand, definitely aren't. No one has got a good word to say for goblins except Miss Beadle. Why not take young Sam along to see her tomorrow? After all, she is the one that got him onto this poo business. And she is a writer, so I expect she'll be quite glad of the interruption." Yes, that would be a good idea, and it would be educational for young Sam, and not an investigation at all. Thus satisfied, he waited for the onset of sleep, against a chorus of howls, shrieks, and mysterious distant bangs, surreptitious rustling, screeches, disconcerting ticking noises, dreadful scratching sounds, terrible flapping of wings very close, and all the rest of the unholy orchestra that is known as the peace of the countryside. He had enjoyed a late-night game of snooker with Willikins just to keep his hand in, and Vimes, half listening now to the outlandish cacophony, harsh or jarring sound. Cacophony, an incongruous or chaotic mixture, a striking combination. Cacophony. Half listening now to the outlandish cacophony, wondered whether the solving of a complex crime, one that needed a certain amount of care, could be compared to a game of snooker. Surely, there were a lot of red balls and they got in the way, so you had to knock them down. But your target, your ultimate target, was going to be the black. Powerful people lived in the shires, and so he would tread with care. Metaphorically, Sam Vimes, somewhere in his head, picked up his cue. Vimes lay back in the bed, enjoying the wonderful sensation of gradually being eaten by the pillows, and said to Sybil, "Do the Rust family have a place down here?" Too late, he reflected that this might be a bad move, because she might well have told him all about it on one of those occasions when, so unusually for a married man, he was not paying much attention to what his wife was saying. And therefore, he might be the cause of grumpiness in those precious warm minutes before sleep. All he could see of her right now was the very tip of her nose, as the pillows claimed her, but she mumbled drowsily, "Oh, they bought Hangnail Manor 10 years or so ago, after the Marquis of Van Taylor murdered his wife with a pruning knife in the Pineapple House. Don't you remember? You spent weeks searching the city for him. In the end, everybody seemed to think he'd gone off to Forex and disguised himself by not calling himself the Marquis of Van Taylor." "Oh, yes," said Vimes, "and I remember that a lot of his chums were quite indignant about the investigation. They said that he'd only done one murder, and it was his wife's fault for having the bad taste to die after just one little stab." Sybil turned over, which meant that, since she was a woman happily rich in gravitational attraction, as she turned, the pillow closest to Sam, acting like a gear in a chain, spun softly in the opposite direction, so that Sam Vimes found himself now lying on his face. He struck out for the surface again and said, "And Rust bought it, did he? It's unusual for the old fart to spend a penny more than he needs to." "It wasn't him, dear. It was Gravid." Vimes woke a little more. "The son? The criminal?" "I believe, Sam, that the word is entrepreneur, and I'd like to go to sleep now if it's all the same to you." Sam Vimes knew that the best thing he could say was nothing, and he sank back into the depths, thinking words like fiddler, sharp dealer, inserter of a crafty crowbar between what is right and wrong, and mine and thine, wide boy, financier, and untouchable. Gently drifting into a nightmare world where the good guys and bad guys so often changed hats without warning, Vimes wrestled sleeplessly to the ground and made certain that it got 8 hours.